I'm Shelby, 35, and I always believed family bonds were unbreakable until last Christmas dinner changed everything. 4 words from my mother's mouth shattered the foundation of what I thought family meant. "You're dead to me." Those words hung in the air like icicles, freezing the room and my heart simultaneously. That night I made a decision that would alter the course of my life forever. Before I tell you how I rebuilt my life from the ashes of family betrayal, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit subscribe and join me on this journey of heartbreak and healing. Growing up in a quiet suburb just outside Seattle, I never would have predicted where my relationship with my mother Rachel would eventually lead. Our modest 2-story house on Maple Street looked picture-perfect from the outside. Well-maintained lawn, seasonal decorations, and family photos proudly displayed in the living room. But appearances can be deceiving. Rachel was what many would call a helicopter parent, though that term seems almost too gentle in retrospect. She monitored every aspect of my life with an intensity that felt suffocating. My homework was inspected nightly, my friendships carefully screened, and any deviation from her expectations was met with emotional manipulation rather than conversation. "Do whatever you want, Shelby, but know you're breaking my heart," became her signature phrase whenever I showed signs of independence. As a child, those words were devastating. The guilt would consume me, and I'd quickly abandon whatever plan had triggered her disapproval. My father, Thomas, existed in the periphery of our family dynamic. A quiet accountant who spent long hours at the office, he avoided conflict at all costs. When tensions rose between my mother and me, he'd suddenly remember urgent work in the garage or papers that needed reviewing. His favorite phrase became, "Just do what your mother says, it's easier that way." Looking back, his passive enablement was its own form of betrayal. My younger sister, Amanda, was my saving grace throughout childhood. 3 years my junior, she possessed a natural ability to navigate Rachel's emotional minefields with grace I never mastered. We formed a silent alliance, supporting each other through the unpredictable storms of our mother's moods. Late-night whispered conversations in my bedroom became our therapy sessions, analyzing what had triggered the latest outburst and strategizing how to maintain peace. Despite the emotional turbulence at home, I managed to excel academically. School became my sanctuary, a place where effort led to predictable results, unlike the constantly shifting goalposts at home. My teachers praised my focus and determination, unaware that these qualities had developed as survival mechanisms rather than natural talents. When I was accepted to Washington State University to study engineering, I felt a freedom I'd never known before. The campus was only a few hours from home, but the psychological distance was immeasurable. For the first time, I could make decisions without immediately calculating their emotional cost in terms of my mother's reaction. It was during my junior year that I met Eliza in a campus coffee shop. She was studying psychology with a warm smile and an easy laugh that drew me in immediately. Our connection was instant and unlike anything I'd experienced before. With Eliza, conversations flowed naturally without the constant self-censoring I'd grown accustomed to. She listened, truly listened, without judgment or manipulation. This simple act felt revolutionary. Rachel's reaction to Eliza was predictably negative. Despite never having met her, my mother found countless reasons to disapprove. Eliza's psychology major was impractical. Her hometown of Portland was too liberal. Her curly hair in the Facebook photo I showed was unprofessional. The criticisms were as endless as they were ridiculous. "I just want what's best for you," Rachel would insist during our weekly phone calls. "You're still so young. How can you know this girl is right for you?" The real issue, which became increasingly clear, was that Eliza represented a threat to Rachel's control. Every hour spent with Eliza was an hour not spent under my mother's influence, and that was unacceptable to her. The first major battle occurred during my senior year when I chose to spend Thanksgiving with Eliza's family in Portland. Rachel didn't speak to me for 2 weeks after I informed her of my decision. Thomas called, his voice strained, asking if I couldn't just come home this once to keep the peace. But something had shifted within me. Experiencing the warm, supportive dynamics of Eliza's family had illuminated just how unhealthy my own family situation was. Their discussions included diverse opinions without anyone storming off. Disagreements were handled with respect rather than emotional weaponry. It was eye-opening and heartbreaking simultaneously. After graduation, Eliza and I both found jobs in Seattle. Being back in my hometown should have made maintaining family relationships easier, but proximity only seemed to intensify Rachel's expectations. Sunday dinners became mandatory in her mind, and any absence was treated as a personal affront, regardless of the reason. When I received a promotion to senior engineer last September, it came with increased responsibilities and occasional travel. Rachel took my decreased availability as a personal rejection rather than a natural career progression. The pattern of emotional blackmail that had characterized my childhood re-emerged with renewed vigor. "I guess your job matters more than your family now," she said during one particularly tense phone call. "I raised you better than this, Shelby." What she never seemed to understand was that her definition of family was based on obligation and control rather than love and mutual respect. And that fundamental disconnect was laying the groundwork for the explosion that would come that fateful Christmas evening. The year leading up to that Christmas had been one of significant changes in my life. After 5 years of saving, Eliza and I had finally accumulated enough for a down payment on our first home. We spent weekends touring properties across Seattle, eventually falling in love with a charming 3-bedroom Craftsman in Ballard about 20 minutes from my parents' house. The neighborhood had excellent schools, an important consideration as we were beginning to discuss starting a family of our own. When we closed on the house in October, I was buzzing with excitement to share the news with my family. Homeownership felt like a tangible marker of adulthood, an achievement worthy of celebration. I called my parents immediately after signing the papers, hoping for congratulations. "Ballard, why would you move all the way out there?" was Rachel's immediate response. "No congratulations, no questions about the house itself. That's at least 20 minutes from us in good traffic. What happens when you have kids? We won't be able to help out." I tried explaining the merits of the neighborhood, the parks, the school district, the sense of community, but Rachel had already decided this was another example of me pulling away from the family. Thomas got on the phone, briefly offering a half-hearted "congratulations, son," before passing the phone back to my mother, who continued listing reasons why our choice was flawed. Later that evening, Amanda called to apologize for our mother's reaction. "She's been different lately, Shelby," my sister confided. "More on edge than usual. Dad says to just give her time to adjust to the idea." But time didn't improve Rachel's attitude about our home purchase. When we invited my family over for a housewarming dinner in November, she found fault with everything from the street parking situation to the creaking floorboards in the hallway. What should have been a joyful evening turned into an exercise in patience as Eliza and I weathered Rachel's thinly veiled criticisms. "The house has character," Eliza whispered to me as we washed dishes later that night. Unlike some people we know, her attempt at humor was appreciated, but we both knew the situation was becoming increasingly untenable. Work pressures added another layer of complexity to the family dynamic. My promotion had come with the responsibility of overseeing a major infrastructure project with tight deadlines. 60-hour work weeks became normal throughout November and December, leaving little energy for navigating the emotional minefield of family gatherings. As Christmas approached, Eliza and I discussed whether attending the traditional family dinner at my parents' house was worth the inevitable stress. "Maybe we should just stay home this year," Eliza suggested one evening as we decorated our own Christmas tree. "Start our own traditions." The suggestion was tempting, but the thought of the fallout seemed worse than enduring one dinner. "If we don't go, we'll never hear the end of it," I reasoned. "Let's just get through this one holiday, and then we can reevaluate for next year." With that decision made, I threw myself into finding thoughtful gifts for my family, hoping that the perfect presents might somehow ease the growing tension. For Amanda, I found a first-edition copy of her favorite childhood book. For Thomas, a rare scotch he'd once mentioned, wanting to try. And for Rachel, after much deliberation, I selected an elegant silver bracelet with birthstones representing each family member. Eliza expressed concerns as Christmas Eve approached. "I'm worried about how your mother's been acting lately," she said as we wrapped the gifts. "The comments at Thanksgiving were bad enough, but the way she's been talking to you on the phone, it's escalating." I couldn't disagree. but felt trapped in a pattern established decades ago. "We'll keep the visit short," I promised. "Dinner and gifts, then we make our excuses and leave." The drive to my parents' house on Christmas Eve was tense with anticipation. Holiday lights twinkled from neighboring homes, a cheerful contrast to the knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. Eliza squeezed my hand as we pulled into the driveway, the gesture conveying both support and solidarity. Rachel answered the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her Merry Christmas sounded rehearsed, and the hug she offered was brief and perfunctory. Thomas followed with a warmer greeting, taking our coats and offering drinks. Amanda arrived moments later with her boyfriend Jake, her eyes communicating silent encouragement. The gift exchange after dinner was awkward at best. Rachel barely acknowledged the bracelet, setting it aside with a cursory "thank you" before moving on. Her gift to us, a set of monogrammed towels for our new home, came with the passive-aggressive comment, "Since you decided to move so far away, I wanted you to have something to remember us by." I bit my tongue, reminding myself that it was just one evening, a few hours to endure before we could retreat to the peace of our own home. Little did I know that the true test of endurance was yet to come. The dining room of my childhood home had been transformed for Christmas dinner. Crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier that had hung there for 20 years. The good china, only used for holidays and special occasions, was meticulously arranged on the antique oak table. Rachel had placed name cards at each setting, an unnecessary formality for a gathering of 6 people who had known each other for years. But control over seating was just another way my mother maintained her sense of authority over family gatherings. I was placed at one end of the table, directly opposite my father, who sat at the head. Eliza was not beside me, but across from me, sandwiched between my father and Amanda. This arrangement, I suspected, was deliberate, separating Eliza and me while positioning Rachel at my right hand, where she could easily engage or interrupt me. The first half hour of dinner progressed with strained small talk. Thomas inquired about my recent work projects with genuine interest. Amanda shared amusing stories from her job as a high school counselor. Jake, still relatively new to these family gatherings, maintained a polite smile throughout, occasionally catching my eye with a look that suggested he was beginning to understand the complex undercurrents. Rachel remained uncharacteristically quiet during these exchanges, picking at her roast beef and interjecting only occasionally with questions that felt like traps. "So, Eliza, have you convinced Shelby to repaint that awful blue bathroom in your new house? Or Amanda mentioned you missed your dental cleaning last month, Shelby. I hope you've rescheduled it." I deflected these comments as best I could, steering conversations toward neutral topics. The weather, the Seahawks' recent winning streak, the Christmas lights display at the downtown park. Anything to maintain the fragile peace. It was during dessert, Rachel's traditional apple pie, that the conversation veered into dangerous territory. Thomas, in an innocent attempt at conversation, asked about my upcoming work schedule for the new year. "Actually, I'll be traveling to San Diego for a conference in January," I replied, helping myself to a slice of pie. "The company is presenting our new infrastructure design. It's a pretty big deal that they've selected our team to represent the firm." "That's fantastic, honey," Eliza said, her pride evident. "Your hard work is really paying off." Rachel set down her fork with a deliberate clink against fine china. "January. When exactly in January?" The shift in her tone was subtle but unmistakable. I felt the familiar warning signals flare in my mind, the slight narrowing of her eyes, the tightening of her jaw. Still, I answered truthfully. "January 15th through the 20th. The 15th is my birthday, Shelby." Rachel's voice had taken on the dangerous quietness I recognized from childhood confrontations. "We always have a family dinner for my birthday." "I know, Mom. I'm really sorry about the timing, but this conference is mandatory for project leads. I tried to get out of it, but there was no flexibility with the dates." "Mandatory," she repeated the word, dripping with skepticism. "I find it interesting how work events have become mandatory, while family obligations have become optional in your life lately." Thomas interjected Rachel. "I'm sure Shelby wouldn't miss your birthday if he had a choice. Maybe we could celebrate the weekend before instead." But Rachel wasn't interested in solutions. First Thanksgiving dinner cut short because of some work deadline, then moving to a house 20 minutes away, and now missing my birthday entirely. It's becoming quite clear where your priorities lie. I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. Mom, this isn't about priorities. It's about adult responsibilities. My career is important too, and sometimes there are conflicts that can't be avoided. I understand perfectly, Rachel replied, her voice rising. Ever since she came into your life, everything has changed. She glared at Eliza. You've systematically pulled him away from his family. Eliza flinched but remained composed. Rachel, I've never tried to come between Shelby and his family. These are his professional decisions and I support him. Of course you'd say that, Rachel scoffed. You've gotten exactly what you wanted. A house far away from us, holidays on your terms, and now my son missing my birthday for the first time in 35 years. The accusation was so unfair and misplaced that I felt a surge of anger. Still, I tried once more to defuse the situation. Mom, this isn't about Eliza. The conference dates were set by my company. I'll make it up to you when I get back, I promise. Make it up to me. Rachel's voice had taken on a shrill quality. You can't make up for choosing work over family. That's not how it's supposed to be. I raised you better than this. Rachel, Thomas warned, let's not ruin Christmas dinner over a schedule conflict. Stay out of this, Thomas, she snapped. You've never understood how important family traditions are. Birthdays mean something in this house. I could see this spiraling out of control, and made one last attempt at reason. Mom, I understand you're disappointed, but this is my career we're talking about. I've worked incredibly hard for this opportunity. Rachel pushed her chair back from the table, standing to gain height advantage. Your career, your house, your choices. It's all about you now, isn't it, Shelby? What about my feelings? What about what I want for once? This isn't about what you want, I replied, struggling to keep my voice level. This is about what I need to do as a professional adult. I'm not missing your birthday to hurt you. Rachel's face contorted with anger. I don't believe you. I think you're doing this deliberately to punish me for speaking my mind about your house and your lifestyle choices. That's ridiculous, I said, finally letting frustration edge into my voice. Not everything in my life revolves around you, Mom. As soon as the words left my mouth, I knew I'd crossed an invisible line. The room went completely still. Amanda and Jake stared at their plates. Thomas looked desperately between Rachel and me, as if searching for a way to pull us back from the brink. Eliza reached across the table, her fingers just brushing mine in silent support. Rachel straightened to her full height, her face transformed by fury and hurt into something I barely recognized. When she finally spoke, her voice was ice cold and crystal clear. You're dead to me. 4 simple words delivered with such conviction that they seemed to physically strike me. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if time itself had frozen along with the air in my lungs. Thomas finally broke the silence. Rachel, you don't mean that. You're upset, but that's going too far. She didn't acknowledge him, her gaze fixed unwaveringly on me. I've given everything for this family for you, and this is how you repay me. By dismissing my feelings and choosing everything else over me, then we're done. I felt strangely calm in that moment, as if watching the scene from outside my body. With deliberate movements, I placed my napkin beside my half-eaten pie. I think it's time for us to go, I said quietly. Eliza was already standing, gathering her purse. Amanda looked devastated, tears streaming silently down her face. Thomas seemed paralyzed, his mouth opening and closing without producing words. Without another word, I stood, took Eliza's hand, and walked out of the dining room. We collected our coats from the front closet, the rustle of fabric sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. Rachel remained in the dining room, but I could feel her presence like a storm cloud behind us. As we stepped into the cold December air, the Christmas lights on neighboring houses seemed to mock the darkness that had settled over my heart. We got into our car and drove away from my childhood home, neither of us speaking until we were several blocks away. Only then did Eliza reach over and squeeze my hand. I'm so sorry, Shelby, she whispered. I couldn't respond. The words, "You're dead to me," echoed in my head, drowning out all other thoughts. In my 35 years, I had never imagined hearing those words from my mother's lips, especially not over something as mundane as a missed birthday dinner. As we drove through the silent streets of Seattle decorated for a holiday that suddenly felt hollow, I knew with absolute certainty that something fundamental had shifted. The relationship I had spent decades trying to navigate to preserve despite its toxicity had finally broken beyond repair. The drive home from my parents' house was conducted in complete silence. Seattle's Christmas lights blurred through the windshield as Eliza navigated the evening traffic. Occasionally, she would glance my way, her concern palpable, but she intuitively understood my need for quiet in that moment. The words, "You're dead to me," played on an endless loop in my mind, each repetition cutting deeper than the last. When we finally pulled into our driveway, the cheerful wreath on our front door felt like it belonged to another life entirely. We entered our home, removed our coats, and went through the motions of returning to normal space. But nothing felt normal anymore. It wasn't until we were sitting on our living room couch, the Christmas tree lights blinking silently in the corner, that the emotional dam broke. The first sob caught me by surprise, erupting from somewhere deep inside. Once it started, I couldn't stop. 35 years of walking on eggshells, of rationalizing behavior that shouldn't be rationalized, of blaming myself for my mother's emotional instability, it all came pouring out. Eliza held me through it all, her arms a safe harbor in the storm. She didn't offer platitudes or false reassurances. She simply provided what I needed most in that moment, unconditional presence. I never thought she'd go that far. I finally managed to say, once the worst of the crying had subsided, to say I'm dead to her, over a birthday dinner. "This isn't really about the birthday," Eliza replied gently. "This is about control. You've been pulling away, making your own decisions, and she can't handle it." My phone buzzed repeatedly throughout the evening. Amanda had called 3 times and sent multiple text messages expressing her shock and asking if I was okay. There was one missed call from Thomas, but no voicemail or text, typical of his conflict-avoidant nature. Notably absent was any communication from Rachel. I finally called Amanda back around midnight. "I'm so sorry, Shelby," she said immediately, her voice thick with tears. "Mom completely lost it. Dad tried talking to her after you left, but she locked herself in their bedroom and won't come out." "It's not your fault," I assured her, summoning energy I didn't feel to comfort my sister. "This has been building for a long time." "What are you going to do?" she asked. It was a simple question without a simple answer. "I need some space," I replied honestly. "I can't keep doing this cycle anymore, Amanda. The manipulation, the guilt, trips, the emotional blackmail. I'm exhausted." "I understand," she said, and I believed she did. Amanda had witnessed our mother's behavior toward me for her entire life. "Just please don't shut me out too, okay?" "Never," I promised. "You're not part of this problem." After hanging up, I spent a sleepless night staring at the ceiling, Eliza's steady breathing beside me, the only anchor to normalcy. My thoughts wandered through a lifetime of similar incidents, each less severe than tonight's but cut from the same cloth. The time Rachel hadn't spoken to me for 3 days because I chose to go to a friend's birthday party instead of a family dinner. The silent treatment when I selected a college based on its engineering program rather than its proximity to home. The tears when Eliza and I announced our engagement, not of joy but of accusation. "I guess you'll be her family now instead of ours." By morning, a clarity had emerged from the emotional chaos. This wasn't a single incident that could be smoothed over with an apology and a makeup dinner. This was the breaking point in a lifetime pattern that would continue as long as I allowed it. Over coffee, Eliza and I had the conversation that would reshape our future. "I think I need to establish some real boundaries," I said, the words both terrifying and liberating. "Maybe even cut contact completely for a while." Instead of trying to talk me out of it, Eliza nodded. "I think that might be the healthiest choice, Shelby. What she said last night wasn't just hurtful, it was emotionally abusive." That term, emotionally abusive, had never explicitly entered my thinking about my relationship with Rachel, but once spoken aloud it fit with undeniable accuracy, unlocking a new perspective on my entire childhood and adult relationship with my mother. That afternoon I began researching toxic family relationships, consuming articles and forum posts from others who had experienced similar dynamics. The stories were different in detail but identical in pattern. Controlling parent emotional manipulation guilt as a weapon independence treated as betrayal. Most importantly, I read accounts of people who had established boundaries or even cut contact entirely, and the overwhelming sense of peace they described afterward. Within days, I had scheduled a consultation with a therapist specializing in family trauma. Dr. Linden, a compassionate woman in her 50s, listened to my account of Christmas dinner and the lifetime of control that preceded it. "What you're describing is a classic pattern of emotional manipulation," she confirmed. "Your mother appears to have significant control issues that have affected your relationship throughout your life." "So cutting contact isn't an overreaction?" I asked, still struggling with the ingrained guilt that accompanied any action my mother wouldn't approve of. "Based on what you've shared, taking space to establish healthy boundaries sounds completely appropriate," Dr. Linden replied. "This doesn't necessarily mean forever, but it does mean giving yourself time to heal and develop stronger personal boundaries." With her guidance, I drafted a clear, firm email to my parents. I explained that the events of Christmas dinner had made it clear that our relationship had become unhealthy. I stated that I would be taking a break from communication to focus on my own well-being. I emphasized that this wasn't a punishment, but a necessary step for my mental health. I closed by asking them to respect my decision by not contacting me until I reached out first. The practical aspects of separation followed changing my email address, setting up mail forwarding, blocking Rachel's number on my phone, and adjusting privacy settings on social media. I maintained limited contact with Amanda with the understanding that she wouldn't serve as a go-between. Each of these actions carried emotional weight like cutting tethers that had both supported and constrained me my entire life. Yet alongside the grief came an unexpected sensation relief. The constant background anxiety of anticipating Rachel's next emotional outburst began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of autonomy. "I feel guilty for feeling good about this," I admitted to Eliza one evening about a week after Christmas. "That's because she programmed you to feel responsible for her emotions." Eliza replied, her psychology background offering valuable insight. "But you're not responsible for how she feels or reacts, Shelby. You're only responsible for your own well-being." That simple truth became my mantra in the difficult weeks that followed. The decision to establish boundaries wasn't selfish, it was necessary self-preservation. And for perhaps the first time in my adult life, I was choosing my own emotional health over the impossible task of managing my mother's feelings. January arrived with a blanket of Seattle rain and the strange silence of a phone that no longer rang with daily calls from my mother. The first week after sending my email passed without incident, leading me to hope that perhaps Rachel was taking time to reflect on her behavior and respect my request for space. That hope proved short-lived. By the second week, Rachel had begun what would become an escalating campaign to re-establish contact on her terms. It started with emails from new addresses after I blocked her primary account. The messages alternated between self-pity, "I can't believe my own son would abandon me like this," and accusation, "After everything I've sacrificed for you, this is how you treat me." When the emails went unanswered, she enlisted mutual acquaintances as unwitting messengers. My mother's friend Susan called under the pretense of checking in, only to casually mention that Rachel is absolutely devastated by this family rift. My father's cousin sent a text saying, "Your mother cries every time your name is mentioned. Don't you think this has gone far enough?" I maintained my silence, though each new contact attempt stirred the familiar guilt I was working hard to overcome in my weekly therapy sessions with Dr. Linden. Amanda became my primary source of information about what was happening at my parents' house. "Mom's telling everyone who'll listen that you've turned against the family," she reported during one of our coffee meetups. "She says Eliza has poisoned you against her, and that you've broken her heart by cutting her off without explanation." Without explanation, I repeated incredulously. I sent a very clear email explaining exactly why I needed space. Amanda sighed. "She's rewriting the narrative, Shelby. In her version, she made one small comment when she was upset, and you massively overreacted by disowning the entire family." "And Dad?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "He's doing what he always does, trying to keep the peace without taking a real stand. He says you both need to apologize and move on. The situation escalated dramatically in late January, when Rachel showed up unannounced at my workplace. I was in the middle of a team meeting when our receptionist called to inform me that my mother was in the lobby, insisting on seeing me immediately. She seems very upset, the receptionist whispered. She's saying it's a family emergency. Heart pounding. I excused myself from the meeting. When I reached the lobby, Rachel was pacing near the reception desk, her winter coat still buttoned to the neck. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice low despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "You've left me no choice, Shelby," she replied loudly, drawing attention from everyone in the vicinity. "You won't answer my calls or emails. You've shut me out completely. What kind of son does that to his mother?" "This isn't the place for this conversation," I said firmly. I made it clear I needed space. "Space," she repeated, her voice rising further. "It's been a month. Your birthday dinner is in 3 days. I need to know if you're coming, or if you're going to break my heart again." Several colleagues had stopped to watch the unfolding scene. My hands were shaking as I replied, "I'm not having this discussion here. Please leave before security gets involved." "Security? You'd have security. Remove your own mother." The hurt in her voice sounded genuine, making this all the more difficult. "If necessary, yes," I managed to say, though the words felt like razor blades in my throat. When she refused to leave, continuing to raise her voice about my cruelty and abandonment, I had no choice but to signal our building security. The sight of my own mother being escorted from my workplace, crying and calling my name, haunted me for days afterward. That evening I received a certified letter delivered to our home. Inside was a 5-page handwritten note from Rachel, detailing all the sacrifices she had made as a mother and how deeply I had wounded her with my childish silent treatment. She positioned herself as the victim of my unreasonable behavior, never once acknowledging her role in the Christmas dinner confrontation or the decades of emotional manipulation that preceded it. Thomas made his first solo attempt at intervention in early February, calling from a number I didn't recognize. "Son, this has gone on long enough," he said when I answered. "Your mother is beside herself. You know how she is. She speaks without thinking sometimes, but she didn't mean what she said." "Did she tell you that?" I asked. "Has she admitted that saying I'm dead to her was wrong?" His hesitation told me everything I needed to know. "She's hurting, Shelby. We all say things we don't mean when we're upset." I needed space, Dad. I made that clear, and instead of respecting that she's shown up at my workplace, sent flying monkeys to guilt me, and written a letter that blames me for everything without taking any responsibility herself. Does that sound like someone who's ready to have a healthy relationship? Thomas had no real answer for that. "Just think about reaching out when you're ready," he said before ending the call. "Family is family, after all." That phrase, "family is family," had been used throughout my childhood to excuse all manner of hurtful behavior. It was the ultimate trump card. No matter what was said or done, blood ties supposedly made it all forgivable, even mandatory to forgive. But my sessions with Dr. Linden were helping me see the toxic nature of that mindset. Being family doesn't grant unlimited license to hurt someone, she reminded me during one particularly difficult session. Healthy relationships of any kind require mutual respect and boundaries. As winter turned to spring, the extended family began taking sides in the conflict. My father's brother called to tell me I was being unnecessarily harsh with my mother. My grandmother sent a card urging reconciliation before it's too late. Meanwhile, my mother's sister surprisingly reached out to offer support, revealing that Rachel had displayed similar controlling behaviors throughout their childhood. "She's always needed to be the center of the family universe," my aunt confided during our phone call. "I'm sorry you've had to bear the brunt of that pattern." Rachel's social media campaign began around month 3 of our estrangement. Though I had blocked her on my own accounts, friends reported that she was posting vague, martyred updates about the pain of having an ungrateful child and praying for healing in a broken family relationship. Each post garnered sympathetic comments from people who had only heard her version of events, further cementing the narrative of her as the wounded party. The most manipulative attempt came in April when Amanda called me in a panic. "Mom's in the hospital," she said, her voice tight with worry. "Dad says she collapsed this morning. Her blood pressure was through the roof." My immediate instinct was concern, followed quickly by suspicion at the timing. Is she okay? They're running tests, Amanda replied. Dad thinks the stress of your estrangement might be contributing to her condition. I felt the familiar weight of guilt descending exactly as Rachel would have intended. But something had changed in me over the months of therapy and distance. I'll check in with you later for updates, I told Amanda. But I'm not rushing to the hospital. That would just reward this behavior. My suspicion proved justified when Amanda called back that evening to report that Rachel had been released with instructions to take her blood pressure medication regularly, medication she had apparently been skipping. The collapse had been a dizzy spell, nothing more serious, though Thomas had described it in the most alarming terms possible when calling family members. The 6-month mark of our estrangement brought Rachel's most audacious attempt at reconciliation on her terms. Somehow she had obtained the contact information for Eliza's parents and reached out to them directly, painting herself as a heartbroken mother, trying to understand why her son had cut her off without warning or explanation. Richard and Barbara, Eliza's parents, called us immediately after receiving Rachel's lengthy email. She's asking us to intervene. Richard explained, confusion evident in his voice. She seems to think we might be able to convince you to reconcile. She's trying to triangulate, Eliza explained to her parents. It's a manipulation tactic to gain allies and apply pressure indirectly. The fact that Rachel would go so far as to involve my in-laws, people she had met only twice and claimed to dislike, demonstrated just how desperate she had become to regain control. It also reinforced my conviction that maintaining distance was the right decision. Someone willing to go to such lengths to bypass clearly stated boundaries was not someone ready for a healthy relationship. What should we do? Barbara asked, concerned by the entire situation. Nothing, I advised. Don't respond. Any engagement will just encourage more of the same behavior. As spring turned to summer, Rachel's attempts at contact gradually became less frequent but more dramatic in nature. When showing up unannounced at our home one weekend didn't yield the desired result, we didn't answer the door. She left a small box on the porch containing childhood mementos, my first baby tooth, a kindergarten, drawing a Father's Day card I'd made Thomas when I was 6. The message was clear. She was reminding me of all she had done for me, all the memories we shared, all the ways I was indebted to her. But rather than drawing me back into the fold as she intended, it only highlighted how she viewed our relationship as a ledger of obligations rather than a bond of mutual love and respect. She still doesn't get it, I told Eliza as we examined the contents of the box. Even now, she's trying to manipulate rather than understand. The realization was both sad and liberating. For 6 months, I had held onto a small hope that the separation might spark genuine self-reflection in Rachel, that she might come to recognize her role in our fractured relationship. But each new attempt at contact revealed that she remained fixated on regaining control rather than rebuilding trust. Perhaps this is who she's always going to be, Eliza suggested gently. And if that's the case, the question becomes not when you'll reconcile, but if a healthy relationship is even possible. It was a painful question to consider, but one that needed to be faced honestly as I continued my journey toward emotional independence. As months of separation from Rachel stretched on, I found myself in unfamiliar emotional territory. The constant background noise of maternal disapproval had been silenced, creating space for personal growth I hadn't realized was possible. My weekly sessions with Dr. Linden evolved from crisis management to deeper exploration of long-standing patterns. What we're seeing in your family is intergenerational trauma, she explained during one particularly insightful session. Your mother likely experienced similar controlling behavior from her own parents, though perhaps in a different form. This perspective helped me view Rachel with more compassion without excusing her behavior. Understanding the origins of toxic patterns doesn't obligate you to endure them, Dr. Linden emphasized. It simply provides context for healing your own wounds. Those wounds ran deeper than I had initially recognized. Childhood memories resurfaced during therapy, times when my achievements had been dismissed unless they aligned with Rachel's expectations, moments when natural childhood independence had been treated as personal betrayal, instances when Thomas had tacitly endorsed Rachel's behavior through his silence. I'm realizing how much energy I've spent my entire life trying to manage her emotions, I told Eliza one evening after a particularly draining therapy session. It's like I've been carrying this invisible emotional workload that I never even acknowledged. Eliza's unwavering support throughout this process proved invaluable. Unlike friends who urged reconciliation with well-meaning but simplistic advice like, "You only get one mother," Eliza understood the complexity of the situation. Her background in psychology provided helpful insights, but it was her empathy and patience that truly sustained me during difficult moments. "You deserve relationships that build you up, not drain you," she reminded me regularly. That includes family relationships. With the energy no longer consumed by navigating Rachel's emotional landmines, other aspects of my life began to flourish. The infrastructure project at work that had been the original source of conflict over Rachel's birthday was completed ahead of schedule, earning me recognition within the company and consideration for further advancement. I found myself more present in conversations, more creative in problem solving, more engaged in life generally. "It's like I've been running with weights all these years," I told Dr. Linden, "and now they're gone, and I'm discovering what I'm actually capable of." As spring turned to summer, Eliza and I began creating new traditions to replace the family gatherings that had always been sources of anxiety. We hosted small dinner parties with friends who accepted us without conditions. We took weekend trips to explore the Pacific Northwest. We volunteered at a local animal shelter on Sunday afternoons, the time previously reserved for mandatory family dinners at Rachel's insistence. "We're building our chosen family," Eliza observed as we drove home from a backyard barbecue with neighbors who had become close friends. "People who want to be in our lives because of who we are, not what we can do for them." Amanda remained a bridge to my biological family, though I was careful not to put her in the middle of the conflict. Our relationship actually deepened during this period, freed from the shadow of Rachel's preferential treatment and manipulation. "I've started seeing a therapist too," she confided during one of our monthly lunch dates. "Watching your journey made me realize I have my own stuff to work through with Mom and Dad." "How's that going?" I asked, genuinely curious about her experience. "Enlightening and terrifying," she admitted with a wry smile. "I'm starting to notice patterns I never questioned before. The way Mom pits us against each other sometimes. How Dad checks out when things get emotional. How I've learned to shrink myself to keep the peace." I recognized all those patterns from my own experience. "It's not easy facing this stuff, is it?" "No," she agreed, "but it feels necessary. And honestly, seeing the changes in you gives me hope. You seem lighter somehow." My birthday in July presented the first major family milestone since the Christmas confrontation. In previous years, Rachel had insisted on hosting an elaborate dinner where she controlled every aspect from the guest list to the menu to the gifts deemed appropriate. This year, Eliza organized a surprise camping trip to the Olympic Peninsula with a small group of close friends. Sitting around the campfire under a canopy of stars, sharing stories and laughter with people who accepted me completely, I experienced a profound sense of belonging that had always eluded me at family gatherings. There were no eggshells to walk on, no double meanings to decode, no performances required to earn acceptance. "Happy birthday," Eliza whispered as we zipped our sleeping bags together later that night, to a year of authentic living. The path wasn't always smooth. Well-meaning relatives often tried to broker peace without understanding the fundamental issues at stake. "Your mother's not getting any younger," my grandmother remarked during a rare phone call. "Don't you think this silent treatment has gone on long enough?" These conversations required delicate navigation. "I'm not punishing her, Grandma," I explained patiently. "I'm creating space for myself to heal from patterns that were hurting me. When and if Mom is ready to respect my boundaries, we can work on rebuilding our relationship." Such explanations rarely satisfied family members steeped in the tradition of unconditional family loyalty. But "she's your mother" remained the reflexive response, as if that biological fact trumped all considerations of emotional health and mutual respect. In search of understanding from people who truly comprehended the complexity of toxic family dynamics, I joined an online support group for adult children of controlling parents. The stories shared there reflected my own experiences with uncanny accuracy: the guilt trips, the emotional blackmail, the rewriting of history, the recruitment of flying monkeys to apply pressure. More importantly, the group offered strategies for maintaining boundaries while preserving sanity. From these virtual strangers united by common experience, I learned practical approaches to handling everything from holiday expectations to family members who violated stated boundaries. "You're not crazy, and you're not alone," became the group's unofficial mantra. Those simple words provided immense comfort during moments of doubt. One of the most unexpected friendships to emerge from this period was with Marco, whose mother's controlling behavior mirrored Rachel's in many ways. Our regular coffee meetups became a space for honest conversation about the unique grief that comes with establishing boundaries with parents. "It's not like normal grief where you're mourning what you've lost," Marco observed during one such conversation. "It's mourning what you never had but always wanted, a parent who could see and accept you for who you really are." That insight resonated deeply, helping me articulate feelings I had struggled to name. I wasn't just missing my mother, I was mourning the relationship we could have had if she had been capable of respecting my autonomy. As the one-year anniversary of the Christmas confrontation approached, I found myself reflecting on the tremendous changes the year had brought. The initial raw wound had gradually transformed into a scar, still visible, still tender when pressed, but no longer actively bleeding. The constant anxiety that had been my lifelong companion had receded to manageable levels. The reflexive guilt that once accompanied any act of self-prioritization had diminished. Most significantly, I had developed a stronger sense of self beyond the role of Rachel's son. I was a husband, a friend, an engineer, a volunteer, a complete person with inherent worth not tied to fulfilling someone else's expectations. "Do you ever think about reaching out to her?" Eliza asked one evening as we decorated our home for the approaching holiday season. The question didn't trigger the immediate anxiety it might have months earlier. Sometimes, I admitted. Not because I miss the way things were, but because I wonder if a different kind of relationship might be possible someday. "On your terms this time," Eliza noted. "On terms that work for both of us," I corrected gently. "But yes, with firm boundaries that protect my well-being." Whether such a relationship was possible remained an open question as the calendar pages turned toward December, but whatever the future held with Rachel, I faced it from a position of newfound strength and clarity rather than obligation and fear. The holiday season arrived with a mix of emotions. Decorating our home for Christmas stirred memories of the previous year's painful confrontation, but also highlighted how much healing had occurred in the intervening months. Eliza and I had created new traditions that felt authentic rather than obligatory, volunteering at a local food bank, hosting a small gathering for friends without family nearby, selecting a Giving Tree recipient to shop for. Together, in mid-December, just as we were settling into these new rhythms, an unexpected letter arrived. Unlike the previous communications from Rachel, filled with accusations and demands, this one came in a plain envelope with no return address. I might have missed it entirely, if not for recognizing her distinctive handwriting on the front. For several days, the unopened letter sat on our kitchen counter. Part of me feared it contained more manipulation, more guilt trips, more denial of reality. Another part hoped against hope that something had shifted. "You don't have to read it if you're not ready," Eliza assured me. "There's no timeline for this." When I finally opened it on a quiet Sunday morning, the contents surprised me. The letter was shorter than Rachel's usual missives, just one page of carefully written text. "Shelby," it began simply, "this past year has been the hardest of my life. Losing contact with you forced me to confront things about myself that have been painful to acknowledge. With help from my own therapist, I'm beginning to understand how my behavior affected you throughout your life. I had to stop reading Overcome by Unexpected Emotion. Rachel seeing a therapist was perhaps the last thing I would have predicted. She had always dismissed therapy as nonsense for weak people who can't handle normal life. When I continued reading, her words reflected a level of self-awareness I had never witnessed before. "I realize now that when I said those terrible words to you at Christmas, it wasn't really about your work conference or my birthday. It was about my fear of losing control, of becoming irrelevant in your life. That fear doesn't excuse what I said or how I've treated you over the years, but perhaps it helps explain it." She went on to acknowledge specific patterns, her emotional manipulation, her inability to respect boundaries, her tendency to make everything about her feelings. "These are deeply ingrained behaviors that I'm working to change," she wrote. "I don't expect this letter to instantly repair our relationship, but I wanted you to know that I am trying to understand the pain I've caused." The letter concluded with what appeared to be a genuine apology. "I am truly sorry for saying you were dead to me. Nothing could be further from the truth. You have always been precious to me, though I've had a terrible way of showing it. If you're ever willing to consider rebuilding some form of relationship, I would be grateful for that chance, on whatever terms feel safe for you." I read the letter several times, trying to detect the usual manipulative undertones, the subtle guilt trips, the veiled accusations. They weren't there, or if they were so muted as to be unrecognizable compared to Rachel's usual communication style. "What do you think?" I asked Eliza, after sharing the contents with her. "It sounds like a real apology," she replied cautiously. "The part about her seeing a therapist is especially significant. That represents a huge shift in her thinking." I brought the letter to my next session with Dr. Linden, seeking her professional perspective. "This actually shows promising signs," she confirmed after reading it. "She's taking responsibility rather than blaming you. She's acknowledging specific behaviors rather than making vague apologies. And she's respecting your agency by not demanding a response or immediate reconciliation." "So you think it's genuine?" I asked. "That's impossible to determine from one letter," she replied honestly. "But it's certainly different from her previous attempts at contact. The question is whether you feel ready for any level of reconnection, even if it's just a cautious response." That question stayed with me for several weeks, as I considered my options. The year of separation had been essential for my own healing, allowing me to establish a stronger sense of self and clearer boundaries. I felt more capable of engaging with Rachel without being pulled back into old patterns. Still, the prospect of reopening communication carried risks. After much reflection, I composed a brief email in early January. I acknowledged receipt of her letter and expressed appreciation for her willingness to examine her behavior. I explained that while I wasn't ready for regular contact, I might be open to a carefully structured meeting in the future if her commitment to change proved consistent. I closed by wishing her well in her therapy journey, recognizing the courage it took to seek help. Her response was equally measured, a simple acknowledgement of my boundaries without pushback or emotional manipulation. This restraint, so unlike the Rachel I had known my entire life, suggested that perhaps real change was occurring. By February, we had exchanged several brief, respectful emails. Each interaction felt like testing ice on a frozen lake, cautious alert for any sign of cracking beneath the surface. When I finally suggested meeting for coffee in a public place, it came with clear parameters, a 30-minute time limit, Eliza's presence for support, and an understanding that I would leave immediately if boundaries were violated. We met at a neutral coffee shop midway between our homes on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I arrived early with Eliza, selecting a table that allowed easy exit if needed. When Rachel arrived, alone as requested without Thomas, I barely recognized her. She seemed smaller, somehow less commanding of the space around her. The carefully constructed facade of perfection she had always maintained had softened into something more human, more vulnerable. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she said, simply avoiding the dramatic embrace that would have been her normal greeting in the past. The conversation began awkwardly with surface-level updates and careful navigation around sensitive topics. When the subject eventually turned to the events of last Christmas, I braced myself for justifications or minimizing. Instead, Rachel surprised me. "What I said was unforgivable," she admitted, her voice steady, despite the emotion behind her words. "There's no excuse for telling your child they're dead to you, no matter how upset I was feeling." "Why did you say it?" I asked, the question that had haunted me for a year. She considered this carefully before responding. "My therapist has helped me see that I've always equated love with control. When you started making decisions independently, your career, your home, your priorities, it felt like rejection to me. I lashed out in the most hurtful way I could because I was terrified of becoming irrelevant in your life." "That doesn't make it okay," I noted. "No, it doesn't," she agreed immediately. "Nothing makes it okay. I can only tell you that I'm working to understand these patterns so I don't continue them." The 30 minutes extended to 45 as we began the delicate process of establishing what a future relationship might look like. I was clear about my boundaries, no unannounced visits, respect for my decisions without guilt trips, acknowledgement of Eliza as my partner and priority. These aren't punishments, I explained. They're the basic respect that any healthy relationship requires. Rather than the defensive reaction I might have expected a year ago, Rachel nodded. I understand. I want to earn back your trust, however long that takes. We parted with a tentative plan to meet again in a month, a small step toward rebuilding what had been broken. As Rachel left the coffee shop, Eliza squeezed my hand. How are you feeling? Cautiously optimistic, I replied honestly, and very proud of myself for maintaining boundaries. The following months brought slow but consistent progress. Rachel continued her therapy, occasionally sharing insights from her sessions that revealed growing self-awareness. Thomas, perhaps inspired by his wife's example, began his own journey toward greater emotional engagement, reaching out to me independently for the first time in my adult life. I've been a coward, he admitted during one of our conversations. I should have stood up for you all those years instead of taking the path of least resistance. Amanda reported similar shifts in her own relationship with our parents. It's like they're actually listening for the first time, she marveled during one of our regular lunch dates. Mom actually apologized last week for comparing me to my cousin's wife. I nearly fell off my chair. By summer, we had established a new family dynamic. Not the enmeshed, boundary-violating relationship of the past, but a more respectful connection based on choice rather than obligation. We met monthly for lunch with clear beginnings and endings. Rachel occasionally slipped into old patterns, but now caught herself mid-sentence with visible effort. I'm doing that thing again, aren't I? She would ask, showing a self-awareness that would have been unimaginable before. Let me try again. The most significant test came in August, when Eliza and I announced we were expecting our first child. In the past, Rachel would have immediately claimed ownership of the experience, insisting on accompanying us to appointments, selecting baby items, without consulting us, planning her role as grandmother, with little regard for our wishes as parents. Instead, she simply said, "Congratulations. This is wonderful news. Please let me know how I can support you both during this time." When I thanked her later for respecting our space, she replied thoughtfully, "I'm learning that love means wanting what's best for you, not what's most comfortable for me. I don't want my grandchild to experience the same controlling behavior you did. I want to break that cycle." That conversation, perhaps more than any other, convinced me that genuine change was possible even in relationships that seemed permanently damaged. Not magical overnight transformation, but the slow, imperfect progress that comes from consistent effort and honest self-reflection. As we prepared our home for the arrival of our child, I reflected on the journey of the past 18 months. From the devastating words spoken at a Christmas dinner table to the careful reconstruction of a healthier family dynamic, the path had been neither straight nor easy. There had been moments of doubt, setbacks, difficult conversations, and painful realizations. Yet through it all, I had discovered strength I never knew I possessed: the courage to establish boundaries, the wisdom to recognize toxic patterns, the compassion to understand without excusing harmful behavior, and the patience to allow for genuine growth and change. The most profound lesson came from recognizing that family connections, while important, aren't automatically healthy, simply because they're family. Like all relationships, they require mutual respect, clear boundaries, and genuine care for each other's well-being. Sometimes the greatest act of love, both for ourselves and others, is to step back and require better treatment rather than accepting harmful patterns in the name of family obligation. As I placed a framed ultrasound photo on our mantel, I felt profound gratitude for the difficult journey that had led to this moment of peace. The child growing within Eliza would be born into a family working consciously to break generational patterns of control and emotional manipulation. They would learn that love doesn't demand perfection or compliance, but offers acceptance and respect for individual autonomy. And perhaps that's the most meaningful legacy any of us can create. Not perfect families without conflict, but families committed to growing through conflict toward deeper understanding and genuine connection. What about you? Have you ever had to establish difficult boundaries with people you love? How did you balance self-care with family obligations? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share. Your experiences might help someone else navigating their own complex family dynamics. Thank you for joining me on this journey of heartbreak and healing.